Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy Frank's political podcast for a people's revolution against the corporate fascist state. I'm your host, Sandy Frank, and today we're going to be talking about a lot of things. But mainly, we're going to start continuing our anti-war discussion, looking at a few different sources about how the decades-long wars are being really ramped up again for a lot of different reasons. So we're going to be looking at not just what's happening in the Middle East, but we're going to be talking about the increasing tensions with North Korea, which of course would be nothing but a proxy war that would get us into an actual war with China. And that's exactly what the wars in the Middle East are as well, and that's always what the wars in the Middle East have represented, as a proxy war with Russia instead of China. So, I understand, just because we've been in the Middle East for so long doesn't mean that some sort of global conflict powder keg could occur at any moment that could spark global conflict with Russia or China or any superpower. So we're gonna keep talking about the crisis in Yemen, the starvation, the bombing. There was just a huge bombing campaign the other day. We're gonna look at all the information coming out of there to organize our anti-war movement, because of course we want to be as informed as possible about what's happening. So let's look at this article from Mint Press News. Title is Saudi Arabia's blockade of Yemen's largest port expected to worsen humanitarian crisis. Despite a warning from the UN to end its existing blockades of Yemeni ports, a Saudi-led coalition is planning another major assault on the nation's largest port in the city of Al Hudaydah, a move that threatens to worsen Yemen's already unprecedented humanitarian crisis. So, while the Syrian conflict has long dominated international coverage of Middle Eastern crises, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen has been continually overlooked by the mainstream media. Since March 2015, the nation has been in a state of chaos following the overthrow of former Yemeni President Abrabu Mansour Hadi, who was installed by the United States and Saudi governments by a grassroots political movement led by the Houthis. Following the Houthi-led coup, Saudi Arabia essentially invaded Yemen, eager to maintain control over the strategic Bab al-Mandab Strait, a critical area for the region's oil trade. The Saudis' efforts to maintain their undue influence in Yemeni politics and maintain hegemony over a key oil route has now manifested as a war effort bordering on genocide, one that has claimed the lives of more than 10,000 people, most of them civilians. In addition, more than a third of Saudi airstrikes in the nation are believed to have destroyed civilian targets. Despite the severity of the crisis, as well as Saudi Arabia's apparent penchant for bombing hospitals and civilian infrastructure, the U.S. has remained unusually silent, essentially turning a blind eye in the face of repeated war crimes committed by its ally. The U.S. has involved itself militarily in Yemen to aid in the Saudis' destruction of their southern neighbor, launching missiles and, more recently, botched air raids that claimed the lives of numerous civilians, including an 8-year-old U.S. citizen. The U.S. has also enabled the Saudis to commit war crimes in Yemen by continuing to sell them millions of dollars in weapons. Despite their documented tendency to attack and bomb civilians, while the U.S. has been quick to accuse other nations of similar atrocities in Syria, it has been eerily silent, as well as complicit in, the crimes committed by Saudi Arabia. The combination of minimal media attention, as well as tacit U.S. support for the Saudi war effort, has Yemen on the verge of collapse. According to the NGO Save the Children, tens of thousands of children in the embattled nation are dying due to the collapse of the country's healthcare system. Since Saudi Arabia first invaded, more than 270 healthcare facilities have been damaged or destroyed, mainly directly by the Saudis. In addition, more than half of Yemen's estimated 3,500 health facilities are closed or barely functioning, leaving nearly 8 million Yemeni children without access to adequate health care, resulting in the deaths of nearly 1,000 children every week, according to estimates. But the health crisis is only part of the suffering that has become a daily reality for Yemenis. Famine is also taking its toll, with an estimated 19 million people, 2/3 of Yemen's entire population, in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. More than half of the nation is suffering from the lack of adequate nutrition, according to UN estimates, with more than 370,000 children under the age of 5 suffering from severe malnutrition. Much of the famine is preventable, as it has largely manifested as a direct result of the Saudis' naval blockade of key Yemeni ports. Recent changes to Yemeni central banks also threaten to rob many Yemenis of their capacity to purchase what little food is still available in the country. Despite UN pleas to the Saudis to end their blockades, the Saudis and their anti-Houthi coalition have announced plans to assault al-Hudaydah, Yemen's largest port city. Catherine Shackdam, associate director of the Beirut Center for Middle Eastern Studies and an expert on Yemen, told Mint Press that, quote, government officials in Hudaydah have already confirmed an increase in attacks in Yemeni waters as a result of the latest Saudi-led assault. She added that fishermen have been shot at for trying to feed their families, and drones have been spotted doing what is believed to be reconnaissance work. Sakdam added that their assault is only the most recent effort by the Saudis to cripple the strategic port, remarking that the Saudis are, quote, determined to punish civilians in the hope they will rise against the resistance movement and defeat its forces from inside. Russia's foreign ministry condemned the Saudis' latest plan to cripple the Houthi movement, saying that the operation, quote, would not only inevitably lead to mass exodus of the local population, but would also de facto cut the Yemeni capital of Sana'a from food and humanitarian supplies, end quote. The U.S. has yet to comment on the plan, but the silence thus far speaks volumes. So, what we see happening in Yemen is really just the U.S. and the Saudis and the Western coalitions profiting off of warfare, pretty simply. We are, war is a racket. It's all it is the ability for people to profit off of the suffering of others, and you can even profit off of children starving. You can profit off anything if you have enough power to do so. So let's look at U.S. airstrike hits Syrian mosque, killing dozens. We're going to go into Syria for the next few articles. This is an article again from Mint Press News by Lauren McCauley. U.S. airstrike hits Syrian mosque, killing dozens. While rescuers continue to search rubble for civilian victims, the attack has been widely condemned as a war crime. U.S. military officials have confirmed that U.S. aircraft struck a mosque outside of Aleppo. Syria during evening prayers on Thursday, killing dozens of civilians in an attack that many are calling a war crime. Air War's Samuel Oakford reported that U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, confirmed that a raid took place in the vicinity of Al Jannah village, which is located in the western Aleppo governorate, just a few kilometers from the border with Idlib. CENTCOM spokesperson Major Josh Jock said the targeting was assessed to be a meeting place for Al Qaeda, and we took the strike. Jock added that the target, quote, happened to be across the street from where there is a mosque. And Washington Post staff writer Thomas Gibbons Neff reported U.S. official Al Qaeda strike in North Syria involved two Reapers that fired roughly entirety of their Hellfire payload and followed up with 500-pound bomb. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that at least 42 people were killed and dozens wounded. Local activists told Al Jazeera that the mosque was full of worshippers, with an estimated 300 people inside at the time of the raids. Rami Abdel Rahman, head of the observatory, told the DPA news agency the most of those killed were civilians and that he fears the number of casualties will increase once rescuers are able to dig through the rubble. Making no mention of civil casualties, CENTCOM claimed the strike in Idlib killed several al-Qaeda fighters, according to Al Jazeera. The death toll, quote, appears to be at least the second largest ever from U.S. strikes aimed at alleged al-Qaeda targets in Syria, according to Oakford. As the intractable war against terror enters its 16th year and third presidency with no end in sight to the carnage, as journalist Glenn Greenwald observed. Reporting the reactions and how the strike might impact the fight against al-Qaeda in Syria, Charles Lister, a senior fellow with the Middle East Institute, wrote Thursday, "No underestimating the damage this apparent U.S. strike in Al Jannah will have done. Rebels now equate U.S. with Russia and Assad. Dangerous." And then he says, U.S. strikes that hit mosques and killed tens of civilians give al-Qaeda even more of an advantage. Makes this worse. He says, Ahrar al-Sham says the airstrike that hit Al Jannah Mosque was American and should be declared a war crime. And he says, Qatar's foreign minister calls the Al Jannah Mosque airstrike heinous and says mosque cannot be a place of murder or bloodshed. Okay, so Turkish Deputy Prime Minister Numan Kurtulmus also condemned the attack as a war crime, telling reporters Friday, quote, "This is a crime against humanity. This is a war crime. Bombing civilians, people in the mosque, and a house of worship is unacceptable." Article 53 of the Geneva Convention prohibits attacks on cultural objects and places of worship. Air Wars confirmed that CENTCOM and the Pentagon are further investigating the attack. The strike comes as U.S. President Donald Trump has taken steps to loosen constraints on military engagement, including lowering the standard for what defines an acceptable civilian casualty, as Common Dreams report. So just sickening. You know, the United States has always been off the rails, and this isn't just since the false flag 9/11. This is always what the United States has been based on, making war for profit, especially since the time of the British Empire, of course, when this god-awful country was created. But, you know, we come out of that era, and it's just always been our prerogative to create war for profit and to murder millions of innocent people, innocent civilians. You know, you would think if there were some al-Qaeda targets doing whatever, I mean, it's not true, none of it's true, it's just all made up to sell bombing people for money. But if it was true, you would think that the United States might, you know, create some sort of police task force to, instead of like bomb an area, to apprehend the suspects and, you know, give them to the Syrian government, and to create a Syrian government that can have some sort of police force and legal criminal action force. You would think if the United States and the West was serious about any of this, then they would be creating some actual force that can stop terrorism, but they didn't. They dropped bombs. A huge. What was the tweet from this guy? Involved 2 Reapers that fired roughly entirety of their Hellfire payload and followed up with a 500-pound bomb. Good God, it's disgusting. And it's ridiculous that the way this is reported by so much of the media as actually being against Al-Qaeda, when we know it just creates more Al-Qaeda, and that's the point. So we're not going to look at a more general article about what's happening in Syria. Again, from Mint Press News from Sarah Abed. 6 years of war, death, and destruction. Syrians speak out. Today marks the 6th anniversary of an imposed war and invasion on what was one of the safest countries in the world prior to 2011. A country with a rich history that dates back to 9000 BC. Syria is the cradle of civilization. Damascus is nicknamed the City of Jasmine, where the flower can be seen hugging buildings, churches, mosques, and homes, filling the enchanting streets with an intoxicating sweet smell. And Syria is a very beautiful country. I'd love to go there one day after we take Donald Trump's head and Barack Obama's head and we ejaculate into their severed heads, which is something I would love to do, or at least see happen, for what they have done to innocent people and innocent children. This isn't the article. This is just me being disgusting. But all right, let's read the article. Today was the 6th anniversary of an imposed war and invasion on what was one of the safest countries in the world in 2011. All right, we just read this. Mark Twain in 1867 wrote about Damascus, quote, "She measures time not by days and months and years, but by the empires she has seen rise and prosper and crumble into ruin. She is a type of immortality. She saw the foundations of Baalbek and Thebes and Ephesus laid. She saw these villages grow into mighty cities and amaze the world with their grandeur. She has lived to see them desolate, deserted, and given over to the owls and the bats. She saw the Israelist empire exalted, and she saw it annihilated. She saw Greece rise and flourish 2,000 years and die. In her old age, she saw Rome built. She saw it overshadow the world with its power. She saw it perish. The few hundreds of years of Genoese and Venetian might and splendor were, to grave old Damascus, only a trifling and centennial hardly worth remembering. Damascus has been all that has ever occurred on earth, and still she lives. She has looked upon the dry bones of 1,000 empires, and will see tombs of 1,000 more before she dies." So, some beautiful words from Mark Twain. Syrians in Syria feel that their voices have been silenced and buried under a mountain of propaganda and lies in the mainstream and social media during the 6-year war. There exists a very well-funded, highly manipulative propaganda media campaign that has increasingly twisted the truth. This dishonest reporting has had a direct impact on death and destruction that occurred in Syria the past 6 years. In part 1 of our Syrians Speak Out series, we will look at the message that Syrians in Syria have made today on the 6th anniversary of the war on social media sites. So let's look at a quote from Sama Sham. Quote, "The moderate rebels are celebrating the 6th anniversary of their peaceful revolution by committing 2 suicidal attacks in the most crowded areas in Damascus, killing so far 40 martyrs and 81 wounded. Bloody anniversary equals moderate. Bloody anniversary, quote, moderate shit." and she was referring to the article, updated 2 terrorist suicide bombings hit Old Justice Palace and a restaurant in Damascus, leaving casualties. And these rebels, of course, are the U.S. military. They're the CIA. They're not terrorists. They're not radical jihadis. They're the United States government, the United States media, the United States military, sending in these fake rebels who are nothing but CIA agents to create this kind of terrorism in Syria, to create the need for American intervention and Western intervention. So we're going to look at Remy Sacker of Syria. Deadly bombing on the anniversary of the failed Syrian revolution. Women and children screaming in the streets, trying to get as far as they can before they've taken by the second one. Thank you for observing this damn day the only way you know how to. Reminding us all why all the NATO funding, amnesty fabricating, and BBC dubbing wasn't enough to make you win. We're going to look at a tweet from Maytham. The rebels, quote, rebels, are celebrating 6 years of killing by adapting ISIS-style suicide bombings in Damascus, Syria. It's not a revolution. Again, Maytham. This is how the, quote, rebels celebrate... oh, that's the same tweet. It's just pictures of the suicide bombing. Excuse me. It's incredible to see that regardless of all the death and destruction that has become part of Syrians' daily lives for the past 6 years, that they still have hope and haven't given up. It's almost as if these unbelievably traumatic circumstances that were brought on them by foreign entities have made them even more determined to live an enriched life. It's inspirational and almost hard to fathom, but in many conversations that I have had with Syrians, you can hear it in their tone. When they say Inshallah, which means God willing, or Alhamdulillah, thank God, they truly believe that they will not only get through this, but will rebuild and have an even stronger country than before. We look at a tweet from Maytham. Despite the terrorist attacks, Damascus will always be the beating heart of Syria. And a beautiful picture of Metro Damascus, very modern looking city, very beautiful city. Then we look at another quote from Sama Shama. Quote, to all my non-Arabic speaking friends, I wish you watched this video. It shows the before and afters Syria. You might not like the music, but we can't help not to look back to where we were and where we are now. Besides, it's only a story you will see versus all the mainstream media false stories. So it's just an image of, beautiful modern Syria being reduced to U.S. bombings, destroying, killing nonsense. So, I don't really know what else to say besides the immediate need for the immediate need for the immediate need for an anti-war movement to stop this from happening. It's just going to keep happening, and we're just going to have to keep reporting on more U.S. murder unless people in the United States and people in the West are willing to shut down the war machine, which is massive civil disobedience, which is going to not just the politicians, but the war profiteers, and they have names, and they have addresses, and they have families. To quote Donald Trump, you want to take out them, you take out their fucking families. I say we all go out into the street, we find these corporatist war profiteers, we find these politicians, and we don't only kill them, we kill their families. Just like Russia, just like Cuba, just like France. Of course, we want a strategic plan to make our revolution, our people's revolution happen, but, a good way to create immediate political change from stopping these bombing campaigns is to not only scare the shit out of people like Trump and Obama and Pence and Ryan and Warren and Sanders, you know, we will save these people in Syria in an afternoon if we go find Melania and Barron and drop them off the Trump Tower and make Donald Trump know what it feels like to live in the kind of world that he creates, and then also kill Donald Trump as well. I mean, I'm talking about killing any we can get our hands on, but first we need organization, and first we need massive mobilization of civil disobedience. That, you know, it's really, we need tactics that will stop this killing. It's exactly, you know, you hear the story a lot about Nixon and Kissinger at the height of the Vietnam War and the protests of the Vietnam War, and, you know, they put buses around the White House, and Nixon said to Kissinger, you know, he was afraid that the protesters were going to break in and kill them, and that's obviously where all public servants should be at all times. These people have addresses, and these people have, places where they are, and they have families, and in order to be serious about stopping this murder, we need to be willing to play their own game. So I'm talking about taking Donald Trump's and Barack Obama's heads and smashing them against the pavement to their corpses will really halt this war machine. We're gonna look at another one from Mint Press News, going over to the North Korea front. Let's see what this article has to say. Tillerson talks of preemptive strikes on North Korea, citing weapons of mass destruction. Oh boy. Secretary of State and former ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson closed the door on talks with Pyongyang unless it denuclearizes and gives us its weapons of mass destruction. Seoul, South Korea. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said Friday it would be necessary to take preemptive military action against North Korea if the threat for the weapons program reaches a level, quote, that we believe requires action. Tillerson outlined a tougher strategy to confront North Korea's nuclear threat after visiting the world's most heavily armed border near the tense buffer zone between rival Koreas. He also closed the door on talks with Pyongyang unless it denuclearizes and gives up its weapons of mass destruction. Asked about the possibility of using military force, Tillerson told a news conference in South Korea capital all the options are on the table. Trump weighed in on the matter Friday on Twitter. North Korea is behaving very badly. They have been playing the United States for years. China has done little to help. Tillerson said the U.S. does not want a military conflict, but obviously if North Korea takes actions that threaten South Korean forces or our own forces, then that would be met with an appropriate response. If they elevate the threat of their weapons program to a level that we believe requires action, that option is on the table. But he said that by taking other steps, including sanctions, the U.S. is hopeful that North Korea could be persuaded to take a different course before it reaches that point. Past U.S. administrations have considered military force because of North Korea's development of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles to deliver them, but rarely has the option been expressed so explicitly. North Korea has accelerated its weapons development, violating multiple UN Security Council resolutions and appearing undeterred by tough international sanctions. The North conducted 2 nuclear test explosions and 24 ballistic missile tests last year. Experts say it could have a nuclear-tipped missile capable of reaching the U.S. within a few years. Tillerson met Friday with the South Korean counterpart Yoon Byung-se and its acting president Hwang Kyo-an on the second leg of a 3-nation trip, which began in Japan and will end in China. State Department officials have described it as a listening tour as the administration seeks a coherent North Korea policy well coordinated with its Asian partners. Earlier Friday, Tillerson touched down by helicopter Friday at Camp Boniface, U.S.-led UN base about 400 meters, 438 yards from the demilitarized zone, a Cold War vestige created after the Korean War ended in 1953. He then moved to the truce village of Panmunjom inside the DMZ, a cluster of blue huts where the Korean War armistice was signed. Tillerson is the latest in a parade of senior U.S. officials to have their photo taken at the border, but it's the first trip by the new Trump administration's senior diplomat. The DMZ, which is both a tourist trap and a potential flashpoint, is guarded on both sides with landmines, razor wire fences, tank traps, and hundreds of thousands of combat-ready troops. More than 1 million mines are believed to be buried inside the demilitarized zone. Landmine explosions in 2015 that Seoul blamed on Pyongyang, maimed 2 South Korean soldiers and led the rivals to threaten each other with attacks. Hordes of tourists visit both sides despite the lingering animosity. The Korean War ended with an armistice, not a peace treaty, which means the Korean Peninsula remains in a technical state of war. President Donald Trump is seen as seeking to examine all options, including military ones, for halting the North's weapons program before Pyongyang becomes capable of threatening the U.S. mainland. Tillerson declared an end to the policy strategic patience of the Obama administration, which held off negotiating with Pyongyang while tightening of sanctions but failed to prevent the North Koreans' weapons development. Tillerson said the U.S. was exploring a new range of diplomatic, security, and economic measures. Central to the U.S. review is China and its role in any bid to persuade Pyongyang to change course. China remains the North's most powerful ally. Tillerson will meet with top Chinese officials, including President Xi Jinping, in Beijing this weekend. While the U.S. and its allies in Seoul and Tokyo implore Beijing to press its economic leverage over North Korea, the Chinese have emphasized their desire to relaunch diplomatic talks. Tillerson, however, said that 20 years of talks with North Korea have brought us to where we are today. It's important that the leadership of North Korea realize that their current pathway of nuclear weapons and escalating threats will not lead to their objective of security and economic development. The pathway can only be achieved by denuclearization, giving up their weapons of mass destruction, and only then will they be prepared to engage with them in talks, he said. 6 nations aid for disarmament talks with North Korea, which were hosted by China, have in fact been stalled since 2009. The Obama administration refused to resume them unless the North recommitted to the goal of denuclearization, something that the North Korea has shown little interest in doing. Tillerson urged China and other countries to fully implement UN sanctions on North Korea. It also accused China of economic retaliation against South Korea over the U.S. deployment of missile defense system. He called the reaction, quote, inappropriate and troubling, and said China should focus on the North Korean threat that makes the deployment necessary. China sees the system as a threat to its own security. Last week, North Korea launched 4 missiles into the sea off Japan in an apparent reaction to major annual military drills the U.S. is currently conducting with South Korea. Pyongyang claims the drills are a rehearsal for invasion. So what we see here is the United States, again, in a different part of the world, trying to ramp up a lot of hysteria for a war that they want to profit off of. Again, the U.S., especially the U.S., has the power to end these conflicts at any moment. We're the wealthiest nation in the world. We can, of course, give North Korea, the power to fix a lot of parts of it within itself. Of course, we don't do any of that because you don't profit off of that. You profit off of creating this proxy war between U.S. South Korea against North Korea. That'll make trillions of dollars for the war machine, kill hundreds of millions of people, and lead to a global war with China and other superpowers, which is exactly what they want. This conflict has been going on for decades and decades and decades, and of course could be ended any time by the wealthiest nation in the world, who can easily create peace in these places. But of course that's not the goal of the media or the government or the military. Their goal is to make warfare that they can profit off of. You know, these conflicts are completely manufactured by places like the United States to continue to sell war. So, just wrapping up the section of the anti-war section of the program is the importance of organizing an anti-war movement to take our power back. But you know, we also need a media system that can counter this government propaganda coming out that is doing nothing but beating the drums of war and creating the narrative for war. You know, we need this anti-war movement right now, people. But now we're going to look at news log, Caitlin Johnstone. We're going to be looking now at, you know, reforming the progressive movement, or just being able to take the power away from these Democrats who have full control over the anti-Trump narrative, which any real anti-Trump narrative needs to be an anti-establishment narrative, including Democrats and Republicans and Trump. So let's go over to domestic news and look at her article. I'll stop bashing Hillary when the Dems stop being the kind of party that created her. I'm fond of reminding Democrats that the ruling elites of their party just tried to install into the most powerful political office on the planet an unfathomably corrupt candidate who was trying to start a world war with a nuclear superpower. This invariably gets a lot of, "Why are you still talking about Hillary? Focus on Trump," pushback from Democratic Party loyalists who haven't reconciled themselves with the cognitive dissonance of having voted for the apocalypse. But I think there's still a lot of value in bringing this up. After all, the Democratic Party is still showing us precisely zero signs of turning away from the path that nearly inflicted that horror on us in the first place. So sure, keep a close eye on Trump. He is president after all. But don't bother trying to convince me to forget that the Democrats tried to force something like Hillary Clinton upon the American people, especially when they're showing every sign that they'll try to force another warmongering corporatist on us again in 2020. They're resisting even the slightest changes, tooth and claw, acting like a cheating boyfriend saying, "God, are you still talking about that time I slept with your best friend?" while continuing to text her and refusing to apologize. No self-respecting woman would stay in such an exploitative relationship, and neither should we. So sorry, Democrats. I'm going to keep reminding everyone of the horrifying thing you tried to do to us. Thank you for your concern, but that's going to keep happening. I'm going to keep reminding everyone of the Hillary Clinton disaster, because those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it, and everyone else should keep talking about it too. The people who are still currently running the Democratic Party elevated, endorsed, and advanced a candidate who campaigned on a promise to start attacking the Russian Air Force in Syria if elected, and they're still currently pushing to increase tensions with the same nuclear superpower. They're evil, they are wrong, and they need to be placed as far away from power as possible, like scissors removed from the hands of a hyperactive child. She has a meme of Tom Perez and saying, talking about Hillary is a distraction from our effort to create another Hillary. I mean, I get it. Hillary embarrassed the entire party dozens of times throughout her campaign. If I were a Democrat, I'd want people to forget about her too, ideally right away. I'd be spending what's left of my plutocratic funding trying to figure out how to pull an eternal sunshine of the spotless mind on the entire nation and clean everyone's slate. And then I'd tell them that Donald Trump got elected because the Russians hacked our candidate application forms. It doesn't work that way, though. Know when I'll stop talking about Hillary? When the Democratic Party stops being the sort of institution that gives rise to leaders like Hillary. I'll stop ringing the alarm bell when the threat has dissipated. Thank you very much. You don't kvetch about the sound of the smoke alarm when the building's still on fire and most of the occupants are still inside. The ability to hold a grudge and maintain a fixed moral stance has become ever more important since it became legal for the US government to use psyops on the American people. Psyops is a psychologically abusive form of propaganda that inculcates a population into compliancy in the same way a very skilled neurolinguistic programming practitioner like Daren Brown can buy a $4,500 ring with a stack of blank paper, or easily turn an ordinary audience into a psychopathic mob of bullies, rioters, and hooligans, or use a voice of authority to talk good people into committing murder. So she's talking about psychological operations and how they exist and how effective they are. And the people who usually deny psychological operations are usually the most heavily psyoped. And then we have a tweet from Team Trump Russia. It says, "People in Russia are brainwashed by their state TV. How do you know? I heard it on CNN." Okay, so the CIA have used psyops to manufacture consent for regime change in other countries for decades, but in later years. Because of the globalization of the media, there had been some crossover. The weapons of mass destruction narrative was a big old psyop, and it was one they inflicted on the entire world in order to get a reluctant yes to go ahead and destroy a whole sovereign country. That time, they had to include the American people, even though it was technically illegal. But every time you saw or heard the phrase, quote, "support our troops," you were being psyoped. You might have said it yourself or might have been cowed into silence by it. But either way, you were psyoped. Yeah. That's why it's so important to hold a grudge, to have a strong story about who you are and what you stand for, and be loud and proud about it. Have that old-fashioned thing called moral fortitude. We have to learn to hold our own shape in the face of psychological brutalizing efforts of the elite to get us to conform to their sick system. When everything and everyone in our world is trying to shame us into singing their sick song, we have to just sing our song of health louder. So when you feel someone coming in trying to shame you into shutting up about Hillary and the DNC by saying you're whining or you're living in the past or whatever, stand up even taller and just say calmly, "No, I am what health is." In order to make a healthy system, we have to force it to accommodate healthy people. We have to force the sick people to change our shape. And we can all do that by being loudly, relentlessly, and shamelessly healthy. So when someone tries to bring you down a peg or two by implying that you're a purist, or that your ideals are too wholesome and good, or that you're a dreamer, or any of the other ways they say, quote, "your modeling of a healthy and incorruptible moral system is making me uncomfortable," that's our cue to say, "No, you change." If people can't handle someone saying a normal thing like elections need to be fair or war is wrong, then it is them who need to change because they are sick. And we have a tweet from Crank Scorpio. "Millennials, recommit to the most basic New Deal era safety nets and you'll have a voting base for life. Democrats, lol, no." Pretty funny. "Be a huge, strong, unapologetic beacon of health with pointy bits that irritate those that would rather you be a soft and malleable dough child who meekly goes along with the crowd. Learn how to be an irritant, because until the system changes to accommodate our healthy shapes, that's how we'll be perceived. And don't say sorry. We're not the ones who need to apologize. The Democrats seriously fucked up. They rigged an election to force a historically unpopular candidate into the general who lost to someone who was so bad they had it rigged so he would be nominated to make an easy passage for the anointed queen. That's no small fuck up. Their evil incompetence handed the keys of the planet over to an oil-loving, climate-killing, school-destroying troll president because they would rather have him than let a progressive like Bernie Sanders lead. That's so incomprehensibly evil. But the system that has allowed that has remained in place. There's been no assurances about fixing the rigging. In fact, the DNC chair, Tom Perez, had to apologize for admitting it happened. They'd still rather take us to war with Russia than talk about it. I mean, seriously, when you think about it, the evil grows and grows. These are people who would rather take the world to war than fix their own damned election rigging. So no Democrats, will not shut up about it because it hasn't changed yet. When it has changed, then I'll shut up. Fix it, or learn to live with me banging on about it, irritating you on the daily with my spiky moral fortitude. That's the only choice I'm offering. I'm not going to change. You will. So, great article from Caitlin Johnstone. It's about the importance of sticking to our guns so we can, it's not just about taking down the Democratic Party, it's about reforming the entire corrupted system so mainly we stop bombing children. But, her words are better than mine. Now we're going to look at another one of Caitlin Johnstone's articles. It finally happened. John McCain has called Rand Paul a Russian agent on the Senate floor. Well, here we are at last. It was inevitable, really. How could it have gone any other way? When you've got two radically different senators heading two warring factions within the Senate majority who've had a downright catty relationship since at least 2010, things are bound to come to a head eventually. Add that to an irrational McCarthyist witch hunt, the Russophobic warmongering of the neocons, and the non-interventionism of the Paul family, and eventually someone's going to jump the shark and call his peer a Kremlin agent on the Senate floor. It's been building up to this for months. It was a foregone conclusion long before it happened. Arizona Senator John McCain, who has yet to be struck by lightning despite many attempted pacts with various religious deities, lurched to the Senate floor yesterday and proclaimed that anyone who objected to his push to expand NATO by including the unstable nation of Montenegro in its alliance was enacting the will of Putin. When Rand Paul, who has consistently opposed Russia antagonizing NATO expansionism, objected, McCain flipped his lid in a way I've never seen an 80-year-old man do outside the confines of a locked Alzheimer's unit and declared that Senator Paul was, quote, working for Vladimir Putin. Yes, really, in real life. Award-winning investigative journalist Robert Parry has just published an excellent essay for his consortium news outlet detailing that the way the neocon think tanks were already aligning with Hillary to push for a full-scale regime change invasion of Syria and an escalation of tensions with Russia. When Clinton lost, Parry described how the sinister brains behind the neocon agenda were forced to adjust their strategy, lining up with the Democrats and trying to pressure the more pliable Republicans into backing their military-industrial complex warmongering with those two nations. This is precisely the dynamic we saw playing out on the Senate floor with John Bomb Iran McCain's vitriolic McCarthyist attack on the son of libertarian hero Ron Paul yesterday. The Trumpsters, nationalists, paleocons, and libertarians are trying to drag U.S. foreign policy kicking and screaming into something loosely resembling non-interventionism. And the neocons, whose, quote, any war is better than no war ideology is at the core of their platform, have naturally been resisting this. McCain and his senatorial mini-me, Lindsey Graham, who, on an unrelated note, is so deep in the closet we're in danger of losing him to Narnia, have been spearheading this neocon counteroffensive against the Trumpite faction of the GOP to the cheers of delusional Democratic Party loyalists in the McResistance everywhere. McResistance, that's funny. McCain's tantrum on the Senate floor was a very ham-fisted manifestation of the Republican proxy battle. So that's what we can expect to see from the horrible people, if that wasn't already clear. Anyone who opposes pouring more resources into more interventionism to cause more tension between two nuclear superpowers will be publicly painted as an agent of the Kremlin with this new coalition between corporate Democrats and their new neocon BFFs. They will do it unashamedly in front of the entire nation, despite the complete lack of any evidence for their accusations. And until we rip the wheels off this insane McCarthyist feeding frenzy, they will do it with impunity. Hopefully, this really was a jump the shark moment, a far-fetched novelty plot device employed in a last-ditch effort to capture ratings by an ailing TV series right before it gets canceled. Hopefully, McCain's Senate floor tantrum was cartoonish enough to get America to really look at what it's becoming. Hopefully, this was today's version of the Army McCarthy hearings, wherein the American people finally got their first look at what Senator McCarthy was all about and what he'd been up to, causing his approval ratings to plunge and his career to dead end, ultimately culminating in his death by alcoholism 3 years later. Hopefully, what we just witnessed from John McCain was the apex of the new McCarthyist hysteria, because frankly, this is getting scary. So, she kind of pointed to Trump people as not anti-war, but anti-interventionist. Obviously, that's not what we're seeing with the Trump administration, which is now controlled by the same people who are controlling McCain. But it's true that at least the Trump people were pushing for some sort of different foreign policy than McCain and the establishment Republicans and Democrats. Obviously not good, but different. But we have people like Rand Paul and Tulsi Gabbard who are trying to de-escalate and get out of these nonsensical wars for profit. But we really see the Russia narrative really coming, what it could look like its end. We have a lot of people. It seems like it's starting to lose steam with a lot of stuff that's happening. We have Glenn Greenwald's article talking about how key Democratic officials now warning base not to expect evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, because obviously there is none. There's zero evidence for it, but it seems like the establishment itself is really trying to prepare its base for something that they've been so brainwashed into believing is true for months and months and months and months and months and months and months. This Russia thing to so many of the anti-Trump people is more real than real, even though they have absolutely no evidence of any of it. But we have for our anti-war movement, I'm not saying to get behind people like Gabbard and Rand Paul, but they're certainly very, very advantageous pieces of this game that we can use to strengthen the anti-war movement. Again, I disagree with a lot of things about Gabbard and Paul, but I very much agree with a lot of the things they're saying as well. And as a people's movement that has the goal of creating strategies that works for us, for our purposes, it's important to look at all the pieces that we were able to use. So we have these Paulite Republicans, and we have at least just Tulsi Gabbard within the Democratic Party who are really going out against these interventionist wars, and it's important to not to support these people, but to try to lift these people up over McCain and Graham and these psychopath warmongers who need to have their heads bashed into the pavement. I would love to see John McCain publicly executed, to be sure. I think that would be a great thing for our world. That piece of shit has been creating terrorism for profit his entire useless career, you know. But yeah, it's just we need to create this anti-war movement, and we need to act now. We need to act before the next U.S. murder strike in Syria or Yemen or wherever next. North Korea, China, good Lord, Russia, could all end at the push of a button. But thank you for listening. Please like this video, share, comment, subscribe, whatever. My name is Sandy Frank, and I will see you in the next one.